All right, so in this one, we are going to create it so our question can turn into an actual form that we can actually save that data. So to do this, we're actually going to take this query set of questions out of the home page and put it into its own actual page itself. So before we go ahead and go any further, I'm just going to go into urls.py and I'm going to create an actual place for it. So it's going to be very similar to like these other ones that we've done. I'm going to copy contact and just call it question, and question.views.home is what we'll call it, and we'll just say question_home for the name. So now that we've got this, that also means that we need to create a view specifically for this. But since we've already created part of this view, we can go ahead and copy that. So if request.user is authenticated, this part right here, we're going to add that in. And let's go into views.py. We'll say define home, because that's what we called it in the actual urls.py, right? And then we'll just paste this in here. And then else, we'll just do pass for now. So if they're authenticated, then that will show up. This is going to actually be an error, so we'll just say raise HTTP 404, which will require us to import HTTP 404. All right, so now that we've got this, let's go ahead and take a look at this home page. Go into question, and let's run the server. No module name question. And of course, this should be questions.views. There we go. Global name question is not defined. Good, that's what we want to see. So back into our views, we'll do from .models import question. Because remember, we can do this relative import because the view itself is in the same place as the question model. All right, so now we refresh, we see that same thing. Cool, so that's a good start, but now what we want to do is actually create a form for this. Now, if you remember back to the newsletter, it's something very similar to this contact form right here. So this is going to be the question form itself. And this question also, we are going to use one question at first and then kind of figure out how we can store things and understand how that's going to work. But we are going to create a form just like this contact form or very similar to it. So inside of the questions app, we're going to create a forms.py. We're going to go from Django, import forms, and this is going to be called class user response form. So whatever the user answer is, and it's going to be forms.form. And we'll just say question_ID equals to forms.integer field. And then answer ID equals to forms.integer field as well. So this is the form that we'll work with. So back into our views, we're going to import that form. So from .forms, import user response form. And now we'll add it in as our context. So we'll say form equals to user response form. And then we'll worry about everything else in a second, but I'll do request.post or none. So to get the post data or none, and then we'll say if form.is valid, then we'll print form.cleaned data. All right, and let's add this into our context. And I'll say form is equal to form. And I'll also say instance is equal to instance. So we actually want to create an instance. And I'm going to comment out the query set for the context itself. And I'll just say instance is equal to query set and the item at position 0. So if you wanted to figure out what that is, if you're not familiar, you could print out the query set and then you can print out the instance. But basically what I'm doing is this is a query set is a list of instances, and this is getting one of those items. All right, so now we've got this instance and a form. So now we can actually update how this form looks and works. So let's open this up, and normally you would say form.asp to see the form itself. But we actually don't necessarily need to do that in the same fashion. There will be things that we'll need to do, but let's go ahead and leave that out for now. And instead I also don't need this query set anymore. And instead, I'll just say instance.text and then instance.answerSet.all. So we can refresh in here. User response form has no attribute cleaned data. There we go. And the reason it's saying this is because the data hasn't been validated, so it hasn't actually pulled data yet, where before I just didn't run the isValid command. Okay, so is this true or false? Cool. So what's happening here is we actually want to add our data in to this user response form based off of this stuff. So let's go back into our HTML, and I'm going to go ahead and say form method equals to post action equals to, we'll leave it empty, and we'll close off this form. So this is creating the actual form itself, and I'll do an input type equals to hidden. So it's going to be a hidden element, and the name is going to be question ID, and the value will be the instance ID, so instance.id. And then the next part is creating inputs for our answer set itself. So we actually want to create a radio input with different options. So here now, we'll just change this to being input type being radio. And the name is going to be answer ID. And the value for each one is going to be answer.id. So if we load this in, we got this is true part. So we just put answer.text here, and then I'll add a break after that. So that will give us the radio, and then the instance text we should put above everything, so at the top of the form itself. So the question is actually what starts it. So if we go back into our project, we see is this true? And let's put this into H1. H1. There we go. Is this true? And the last thing we would want is our submit button. So after all that, we'll do input type equals to submit. And value being save. And continue. And then lastly, we want to have our CSRF token. So CSRF underscore token. So that's a Django security protocol. So if we run it, we can go ahead and hit save and continue. Type is equal to submit. All right, so I'm going to click on true and hit save and continue. Looks like we didn't have any errors. So it does print out some things. So let's go back into our view. Take a look at what's going on here. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this query set and instance here. Instead, all I want to see is print the form data, or the clean data itself. So let's refresh in here. And we're going to run this again. I'm going to select something, hit save and continue. And what we see is we have our data that's coming through here. So what this means is, from here, I can actually get the question and answer that we needed. So I'm going to also add in, from the models, I'm going to add in answer as well. So I can print out first of all, the answer ID, or the question ID, was equal to form.cleanedData.get, and we'll say question ID. Another way to say this to ensure that it is the question, or to force it, is by using brackets just like that. That will also get us that data as well. And we'll do this exact same thing for answer ID. Change this to answer ID. And now we will actually get the objects, or the instances that are associated to this. Now we already do have the question, but we're building something that's much more than this, especially the form part. So what I'll say is the question instance equals to question.objects.get, and the ID is equal to question ID, and then answer instance equals to answer.objects.get, ID equals to answer ID. And now let's go ahead and print answer instance and question instance. And I'm going to print out the text so we can just see the text that's coming through based off of the ID. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back in here. And we'll say, is this true? We'll go ahead and select true, save and continue. Notice it says true and is this true? So we printed out the answer in text. That's great. So we now have a form to actually get this information itself. So if I change the query set and change the actual instance that's coming through, we can see this other question that's here. And I can say, is your name Justin? Yes, it is. Save and continue. And we see in here, it says, yes, it is. Hello, your name is hello there. Is your name Justin? So cool. So now we have a way to actually get the responses from this form. Luckily, this is actually coming from a user. And now we just have to think about how are we going to save the data or the questions or the actual answer that that user gave and the question associated to that answer. Now that we have that, like how are we going to save that into the database? And the reason I say user is because if we look at this could be any user, right? So it's logged in, and the user itself can actually respond to these questions, and then we can use the data that's coming through to actually save it somewhere. So this is where I'll leave it. If you have any questions on this part, let us know. Otherwise, let's keep going.